I don't know about you, but I definitely have this part inside of me that is mean and cruel and negative and calls me terrible names. That, if you have that, is your inner critic. If we haven't talked about parts work in your one-on-one sessions yet, I'd like to introduce you to the idea now. So parts work is this idea that our thoughts are not us. We are the part that hears those thoughts. All the thoughts come from parts of us. And the theory with parts work is that each of those parts is important. They're there for a reason. And rather than trying to get rid of them, usually what's more effective is finding out what they're there for, finding out what it is that they need to say. So, for example, if you've always had this fear, but you're always shoving it down, normally we find that the fear doesn't go away. It actually kind of gets worse over time until it bubbles up and explodes, right? It's the same with stress and overwhelm. If we try and push it away, then it tends to pile on, bubble up, and explode. So an example of an inner critic, I'll give you my own example, is previously when I would get overwhelmed and be in the PMS stage of my cycle, I would be really explosive. I had a really hard time controlling my energy at that time. And it felt like when I started to spiral that my inner critic was like this angry, armor covered, but not like, like leather armor covered, witchy woman with a bullwhip that would just whip it around and open every wound she could possibly get at while screaming at me that I was not enough, that I didn't do enough, that I made all the wrong choices, all these things that were just super negative and that were a regular sort of narrative that she would come back to every single time. Now, what we know about our parts and about things like these fears and inner critics is that they're usually there for a reason, and the reason is usually somewhat positive. So although they're being negative and being assholes, generally they're there for a purpose, and that is often to keep you safe. So if we can begin to notice our inner critic, that's always the first step. If we can begin to notice, oh yeah, there's this part or there's parts of us that like to come up at these times and tell us how terrible we are. If we can start to become aware that, oh yeah, that's a part of us. That's not who we are. That's not who I am. I am not someone who is not enough and who doesn't do enough and those things. But I have this part that wants to tell me that, or that likes to spew that at me. If we can sort of become aware of that, then when it happens, we can begin to say, I see that there's this part here, and that is not me. So we can start to unblend, to separate out that part a little bit and say, okay, there's this part or parts over here, and they obviously have something to tell me. The way that they're saying it currently is that you're not enough, but maybe eventually I can create a listening space where I can hear what they're actually trying to tell me, why they're here, and what they think that is protecting me from. So that's sort of some deeper work that we can get into, but the very first step of that is awareness, of beginning to recognize the voice, the sound, maybe the visual, the sensation that happens when that inner critic or inner critics rise up inside of you. So your steps for this week are to become aware, start listening for that voice. Maybe you won't hear it. It's not a big deal. Maybe you don't have that. That's also cool. But if you do have that, just start to become more attuned to what that sounds like. And as you become aware of that inner critic, maybe start to get a little more familiar with it. So what does it really sound like? What are the narratives that it always comes back to? If you are someone who likes things that are slightly more tangible, you could draw or make or if you're not, just write out the details of what that inner critic sounds, feels, and looks like. So you could draw the imagery if that helps sort of solidify this part for you. And as we go along, you can use that awareness to then start to open up that inquiry. When it feels comfortable and when you feel ready, you could maybe welcome that inner critic into your space and ask it, what are you here for? What are you protecting me from? So please only do that when you're ready. You can ask for guidance with this because that can be really helpful, especially if it feels resistant or if you don't really get past a question or two. And at the end of the day, you don't have to do this if you don't want to. So if you want to, though, explore and delve and increase your awareness here so that you can recognize that you don't actually believe that you're that terrible person. There's just a part there that does. That can be very healing and helpful in not increasing that stress spiral when we get there.